All right. We hope everyone is having a great time at DSW 2020. We just heard from another dynamic speaker that's provided us with more great insight. So stay tuned as I am about to moderate a panel discussion between four great women. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Gabe Madison. I'm the Director of Community Relations for Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters is so excited to be a sponsor of this year's Dallas Startup Week, in particular, Women in Innovation. And we hope that everyone is gaining great information to assist them in their journey, whether that is an entrepreneurial journey, whether you are a corporate employee, whether you're a member of a startup team, whether you are aspiring to be an entrepreneur, or whether you are in between any of those stages. We want to let you know from Thomson Reuters' perspective, we encourage you. We also provide tools and resources to help support the businesses that are starting up or the businesses that have already gained traction. And we're in some crazy, perilous times. So we're helping our customers to think of new ways of working with confidence. So please visit tr.com to understand how we may be able to assist your business in these ever-changing times. So let me introduce our admired panel today for today's discussion on the right metrics. So first up, we have with us Florence Lowe, who joined Synerzip in 2017 and is the Chief Operating Officer responsible for customer success, working with small to mid-size private equity, venture capital funded software product companies. Also, strategic business development and partnerships are on her list of duties, and overall finance and administration. Synerzip provides agile software product development services to accelerate product roadmaps with cutting-edge technologies in blockchain, machine learning, web development, social apps, mobile, UI, UX, and DevOps. So before she turned to the startup and high growth companies, Florence worked in financial leadership positions at private equity firms such as Hudson Advisors, Capital One, Alex Partners, and American Airlines. So thank you so much, Florence, for being with us today. Our second panelist is Yui Kitson, and she is the COO of Haxiat, a leading end-to-end IoT solutions company based in the US. And she has had the opportunity to work with some of the leading industry providers, device manufacturers, and channel partners globally for the past 3 years. She is passionate about building lean operations, efficient global supply chains, and winning product GTM strategies. Thanks for joining us today. And next we have Amy. And Amy, I'm not going to even try to butcher your last name. So we're going to skip right over that. But when Amy is not rallying the next generation of women developers through after school and weekend outreach, she is Bottle Rocket's Senior VP of Technology. Amy has a degree in computer engineering from the University of Michigan and years of experience as a developer and leader, where she was playing those roles at Motorola, BlackBerry, Disney, and Accenture. And today she's leading Bottle Rocket's technology team. Amy and her team have quarterly hack nights and a training program featuring more than 80 sessions. As if she didn't have enough tech in her life, Amy serves on the board of directors for Bold Idea, a Dallas-based mentorship program for young coders, and she is a regular contributor to Forbes Technology Council and is very active in many local technology and STEM-related organizations. Welcome, Amy. And then we have, last but never least, Jen Garbach, who is a business leader with a passion for building high-performing teams and navigating organizational complexity to deliver customer value. Jen is currently the head of business brand and marketing at Capital One, and she's held roles leading a bank-wide program at Capital One to enhance digital services for branch customers. She's helped to build the digital messaging team and capabilities, and has led an internal organizational transformation effort. In 2017, Jen returned to her B2B roots, joining the small business card to build an expanded product and analytics agenda before taking on her current role as brand and acquisition marketing for lead for the small business card. Jen and I actually have something in common, as she also worked for Thomson Reuters. She worked in our New York, London, and Chicago offices, where she led product strategy in both the emerging markets on our financial team and the fine law business prior to joining Capital One. So thank you, ladies, for joining me today. Very excited for us to have a discussion around how do we measure success and how do we ensure that we have the right metrics. So all of us have different roles and are with companies in various industries. And we can all agree that our companies would not exist if they didn't measure success. So in our audience, we probably have a hybrid of audience members ranging from entrepreneurs to those working in startup, corporations, and just a myriad of others. So forgive me if I sound very basic with my initial question, but why should we measure? Anybody want to start off with that one?
I can get started on that one. So I will say, like, our CEO at Bottle Rocket, Calvin Carter, always says you treasure what you measure. And by assigning a tangible value to something, it gives you a way to assess that value and prove over time what the impact is. So as you mentioned in my bio, I'm on the board of directors for a nonprofit called Bold Idea. And we are struggling to get donations because, you know, it's a donation founded nonprofit. And so we need the donations in order to operate. And so they did a great job of showing metrics, right? We've served 100 kids. But what we didn't do is make that accessible in a way that our donors could actually understand. And so by bringing to life that, like, if you donate $250, we can purchase a Chromebook that will help a student. Or if you donate $1,200, that will fund an entire site for a class of 14 students to learn computer science. And so by really putting those kind of tangible details and something that was measurable, our donations went way up because it was easier to kind of relate to what the impact of those numbers was.
So true. Love that. Anyone else? Florence?
Sure. Hey, first of all, I'm so excited to be on this panel with these wonderful leaders in their companies. Very excited to see this happening. I think when I think about it, I take it back to a very basic level. And Gabby, I'm so excited you asked, and you said it's a basic question, but you know, we have to, that's where we start. We start at the very beginning. I think measuring is a basic need. This is why we have the Olympics, and this is why the Olympics have their roots go back to ancient times. So I think it is good for us to know how far we've come. It is good for us to know what we should look at and measure. This is how we inspire our own selves and our teams. And it's something that you know, every successful company, certainly here at Synerzip, we're very focused on the numbers. We look at them on a weekly basis with the leadership team, the Monday morning meeting. And unless you do that, it's hard to be able to know where you're going.
Totally agree. Anybody else?
I would just add in, I think between Florence and Amy, you guys nailed it, right? We measure for focus and we measure for storytelling, right? Like the focus being a really critical piece of what are the things that are most important to you. So taking inventory of like what you could measure versus what matters. I'm personally like a big fan of John Doerr's Measure What Matters framework. So if that's not a book that folks have checked out, I would highly recommend checking out. His objectives and key results framework is just really tangible. So he's a former Intel exec. He taught Google how to do this as well, but it really creates that focus of, you know, you can measure a lot of things. It doesn't mean you should, but knowing what matters to you can create a tremendous amount of focus for your organization. And then I love Amy's point of, and then incorporating that into your storytelling, right? Whether that's enlisting donors, investors, whether that's telling the growth trajectory of your business, like it's really powerful to be able to tell that story, right? Of where you've come from and where you're going.
Totally agree. Anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to say probably in the audience, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, and the first thing you get asked is, do you have a business plan? And how do we know our plan is working? Is through measuring, what we have put into place, the methodology. Is it working? How well it's working, and how far we are from our goals that we're trying to achieve. And that's why it's very important to constantly measure and review what you measure actually matters and is relevant.
Like it. So to kind of spur off of that, what do you feel like the secret is to measuring success? What do we have to do in order to make sure that we're measuring success accurately?
I could start with a couple of examples. I mean, I probably represent the startup community amongst the speakers here today, and I'm very glad I have the opportunity to share my perspective on measuring success as a startup. So as a startup, you're constantly going through a rapid growth mode. Every few months you could be focusing on something different. So your KPIs constantly change. So you may have a different set of goals you're trying to achieve as a team, even every 6 months. It could be fundraising, it could be proving your MVP or your product strategy. It could be customer adoption methodology that you're measuring as well. So the important to success to me is to constantly review if your KPIs are matching up to the goals that you're setting for your company. Or your team. For example, like if you're a B2B company, are you selling directly to businesses or are you selling through a channel? You can compare these two approaches side by side on metrics like how much does it cost you to acquire a customer, directly versus going through a channel, or how much revenue does a customer generate in the long run if you acquire them directly versus through a channel. So once you have the data that helps you form a conclusion, it'll help you to get focused on forming a strategy that works. I also have another sort of like a tip that I often use and I often tell myself and my team is to set the KPIs that suit your company and the stage you're at. Whether you're measuring how successful your sales process and conversion rates are working for you, or your new feature, if you're developing a new feature that's you're trying to decide if it's a good investment on capital, it's important to measure how well it suits your business and then your targeted customers. So often in our industry, there's a KPI that others talk about is how many devices you have connected on your platform. And I often challenge that theory. For example, others have 10,000 temperature monitoring installed in a building versus if you have 10 devices installed in an oil field that every 10 minutes that it shuts down that costs your customer $500,000. This is different metrics that we're using versus, we're a B2B company that focuses on industrial asset monitoring versus a typical, developer-friendly IoT company. So to me, I often look at the KPI to see, is this right for your company and what is right for your company?
Love that. Very happy that you spoke. Anybody else?
If I can follow up on that a little bit, I love the idea Yui shares about trying to figure out what is really important. And it's so exciting that asset monitoring, which we've been talking about for such a long time, is now becoming such a reality with edge computing. But I think what I'm saying is a little bit more basic, but it kind of follows on to what Yui is talking about. I think first you have to know where you want to go. I think that is the first way to succeed at measuring the right things and being successful in your objective. You have to know what your objective is. Then I think the second important point is you have to have your people, your team, the people you work with in the same room, on that same page, in the same paragraph, in the same sentence with you on what you want to measure and why, and is that goal worth worth working on as a company, as a people, as a person, right? And then start from there. So lay that foundation.
I like that. So
yeah, I'll layer on like a hyper pragmatic overlay to those 2 points, and I think a bunch of the entrepreneurs amongst us here probably relate to that need for pragmatism, right? Getting a business off the ground. Like, once you know what you need to measure, I think there are also 2 just really pragmatic points of, can you measure that thing? Do you actually have the tools, the abilities to measure that? And then do you feel equipped to actually interpret like those results? What insights, what is that going to help you do with those results? And I think those are really important assessments, with no critique, right, along the way, of just knowing if you can't measure it, well, it's great to know what you want to measure, right? But where do you buy the tools, the resources you need to actually get that insight? And then surrounding yourself with the support resources, right, to make sure that you can make heads or tails of, okay, cool, I know I need to like look at my revenue. I know I need to look at my account growth. I need to look at all these different dimensions. But when you put those together, do you know what story that's telling about your business and where you're going? And if not, like, there are great networks like the group that we're talking with right now that can help with that. But I think that's one of those important pushes to make sure that we all understand like what we're measuring, why we're measuring it, and what we want to get out of it.
Sure. And then if I could also pile on here, I think I'd like to go with like more of a tangible, specific example. So if we look at, a product base and, how to define what would be a KPI for a product, something that we've used at BottleRocket is called the North Star framework. And I'm sure many of you have heard of it. If you haven't, check out Amplitude. They've got tons of awesome resources that'll walk you through how to create this North Star for your product. But the most important thing is to keep the most important thing, right? And so figure out what that is. And so, for example, Facebook, when they were trying to think about what was their North Star, what was the thing that was most important, it was not just like acquiring new subscribers. It was not just like, creating this big network. It was like, okay, we want to measure the number of people that in the first 10 days of using our platform have added 7 friends. Well, that's pretty specific. But it's really important because it's hitting not just your new users, but your new active users and your new active users who are now advocates for your platform. So really be thinking about like what that metric is for your business and how it can really, you can hit that right sweet spot to figure out what's important to you and what's going to help you grow.
Like that. Great. Well, like thinking about the actual tools or the actual measurements that have always been in businesses, because you all started in on some other things that you should measure. So besides those, like sales revenue and net profit margin and gross margin, what are some other measurements that companies should be looking at during especially these times when they are trying to maybe start up a company, or maybe when they're in that stage of looking for venture capital funding? Like, what should they really look at measuring at these stages? Did I stump y'all?
No, I'll start. I think we're all trying to be polite and wait for each other, but it might be fine if we interrupt each other. But I'll start. Jen, if you want to jump in, please do, or anyone else. I'll start, Gabby. I think for the early stage entrepreneur and company, and as you mentioned in your introductions of us, we work with a lot of very innovative companies that are PE and VC funded. And so I think from that standpoint, we, from my experience looking across all these companies, and I would say you really at that stage want to measure 1 or 2 very crucial things for you. It depends on what it is. For us at Synerzip, 2 metrics that we look at, and we're a little bit more mature than these companies, but we look at billable headcount, which has a huge impact on what we do. And the other thing that we look at, because we're a customer-centric, client-centric company, we look at what we call red days. How many days do we have that a client has been unhappy with us for some reason, that we can quickly galvanize the organization around trying to fix that. These are the 2 metrics that are only 2 metrics that we look at that are the most important that we consider. So it will be different for every stage of company. And then the other thing I want to, especially for the early stage founders and executive team, what I want to say is also look at how much time you're spending not doing something have a bias for action, but also have a metric around how much time do you have to think creatively about your business and your goals, which is not a business metric, but I think it's an important metric for you in order to be able to move your goals forward.
Yeah, I would underscore the general theme of, in addition to a bunch of like the standard kind of business performance metrics, think about that swim lane of customer experience metrics. And to exactly your point, Florence, like those are going to change from like day 1 to, day 100 plus. Amy called out something like really important early on in her example of, product launch, right? Number of like users enrolling, number of shares. You can get some really great early traction metrics, but then starting to think about over time, how does that turn into customer experience, NPS, a net promoter score? Someone who has interacted with your product, your service, your business, how likely are they to refer or advocate for your product or business to a friend? Those will give you some great counterbalances to the kind of hard numbers that are posting like how you're trending for like a growth and revenue perspective, but how do your customers actually feel about you? And there's some great nuggets of insights that sit like within that when you start to unpack them.
Yeah, no, that's one of the metrics that we started measuring for BottleRocket as well. So yeah, revenue, profit, but we've got customer NPS. That's something we explicitly measure, as well as employee engagement, which is maybe less important when you only have 2 employees. But when you have 200, it's really important to make sure that everybody is engaged and all working towards the same goal. And then we have 5 KPIs. So our 5th one, revenue, profit, customer satisfaction, employee engagement, and then we also have one around innovation, the number of projects that we're running that use a new or innovative technology.
I think that's great. I'm sorry. Were you about to say something? Sorry.
Oh, I was just a follow-up comment as, a lot of companies right now is, I think the toughest thing to do is fighting to stay on track of their revenue generation during, the pandemic. We used to get a lot of leads from trade shows, conferences. And of course, none of that is happening right now. And I see a lot of our peers and struggling on, generating leads and trying different ways of generating leads. And I think it's very important right now to measure how effective is your budget. What gets you the biggest bang for the buck right now, right? A lot of people are trying to figure out new ways of getting customer on board. How do you do this when everything's virtually? And I think it's important, don't just look at what everybody else is doing, try something and measure how effective and how much does every dollar return you is, a good way to measure the effort that we're putting in right now.
Awesome.
Can I add one thing to that, Gabby, before you move on from this topic? I think I would also encourage folks to think creatively about the metrics. Sometimes it's not just about the output of the company or the outcomes that the company is generating. But I'll give you an example of one of our clients, wonderful, this is an earlier stage company called Everest Effect. And the founder of that company is Nasa Mishler. And their mission is to be able to help simplify the world of disaster relief. So the metric that they look at is, so one of the interesting metrics that I didn't know is, whenever there's a disaster, all of us want to donate, and we do, but a lot of that, 70 to 90% of that just sits there because nonprofits do not have the bandwidth, the ability to, and this is where I think Capital One and large companies can come in and help, but the bandwidth and ability to process all those donations, whether it's clothing or paper towels or whatever it is, and so they look at that metric. So it's not something that they do, but they look at that metric as a way to inspire them to see how they're making a dent in the world.
I like it. And for all our audience members, I want to encourage you to continue bringing in the questions. I will definitely carve out time for Q&A with the speakers, and I see some coming in and I'm loving it. So keep putting those in. But back to my speakers. Why do you think sometimes businesses forget to measure those things that are critical to success?
So I can start this. I don't know that people forget to measure as much as there's just so many other things to do. It isn't so much like I forgot. It's like I probably knew that I should be doing this, but maybe it just isn't my top priority right now. And I think that, but it is important, right? And I think that, I think that's exactly what we're talking about. There are some things that are really easy to measure, right? And we talked before, Jen talked about, revenue and profit. Those are super easy to measure, and everybody knows that. Well, when you started getting into things like customer net promoter scores, employee engagement, the other things that we just talked about, like those are a lot more difficult to measure, and they may require you to put a new process into place to even gather the data in order to be able to measure them. And I think that that's a little bit daunting, right? Especially if you've got a startup and you have all of this other stuff to do, trying to implement a new process in order to get that sort of feedback can be sort of overwhelming. But there's lots of tools, there's lots of resources out there to help you kind of enable that. So we set up, like I said before, like we didn't do NPS at BottleRocket for a really long time. We relied on in-person relationships where, we had a client partner that had a one-to-one relationship with each of our clients, and they would get feedback directly that way. But it was always, filtered, right? You're coming through this person's perspective and how they perceive the information, necessarily getting it directly. So we set up an NPS process where, we would send out surveys quarterly to each of our clients and to several different client stakeholders. So we weren't just getting, a single point of feedback. And it's been really beneficial. We've got a lot of really good feedback from our clients about how we're doing and how we can improve.
I'd say +1 to the whole we get busy. And I don't know that changes from entrepreneurhood into the corporate ranks. Like there is always a ton going on, especially like in times like these. So I echo kind of Amy, your sentiment of where you can create like meaningful routines, like around those metrics. There's a sub-segment or a sub-bullet to that that we haven't talked about yet, which is goal setting, right? So thinking about the proactive versus reactive look at those metrics. So once you know what matters to your business, when are you at a point where you can set those targets, right? Those benchmarks of where you want to be driving your business. What are the, regular routines where you're doing a reactive look at the business, and where are the things what are the metrics you're looking at proactively? Are those marketplace metrics? Are those customer sentiment metrics that are helping you, take the forward looking view, as well as like the healthy balance scorecard of like what's happened like in the past?
Yeah, I'm just seeing in the audience, there is someone mentioning about, it's always easier to do troubleshooting, problem solving, innovating. It is so true. Like I see in the startup world, there's a lot of technical founders. They're always focused on innovating the next best, product. But when you put that product into marketplace, how many people are ready, are prepared to pay for the price that you wanted? At the end of the day, most of us are running a for-profit business and things like that. I think the reason why a lot of people forget to measure or not sure what to measure is they have their dedicated tasks or their responsibilities in the team. There's no one on the team that is looking at setting up these KPIs, especially in the startup world. Everybody has to be doing so many things. I think if you don't have that person on board, it's important to set aside a certain amount of time, because if you don't set it up, it's very easy to overlook and skip that step. To have a time dedicated to speaking to advisors, or I actually learned a lot of things through the fundraising practice. Even though you think when you're fundraising, you're trying to fundraise, but you get a lot of benefit from speaking to investors to see what their perspective is when they look at a startup. What is the KPI they're trying to measure us on? It's completely different to what we're used to as running a startup. You have a different set of KPIs, so it's important to get different perspective by speaking to people that are not in your immediate circle, and dedicate that time every, say, 2 weeks or every month or even a week, an hour a week, speaking to someone. Make that a goal to kind of get an outside perspective on how well we're doing.
I think what Yui said is very brilliant, because you have to make the time, even though you're so busy. We are all extremely busy, and this is why sometimes we measure the wrong things, or we don't change what we measure quickly enough. But I think an insight that Yui has, I think, is very good for startups to remember, because at scale and when you're larger, you will have to dedicate people to doing this. And I think that's important, and just as important as anything else that you need to do within the scaling a company. At the beginning, I think and even at a large company, you want to build it into the DNA. You want to build it into the framework. I'll give you an example from software development. We do a lot of software development, and if measuring comes after the fact, then you have to go back and refactor a lot of code to do measuring. But if along the way you add it into the standards and practices that you follow, where you put it into logging, put logging in, put into your code, put logging in, so that you start to take measure data even before you're ready to start looking at it, but have data coming out of your systems, your processes, and make it easy for yourself. Even if you're a solopreneur, like some of the comments on there, take the time. You'll want to know where you're going.
So with that, what are some of you all's favorite tools, or some of you all's favorite metrics that you would advocate for our audience today?
I'm going to say +1 for Jen's OKRs. Go look up OKRs.
Yeah, you heard my, I'll give another vote for NPS, right? Something customer centric. Make sure you're measuring inside out, like from your business, like what's going to make money for your business, but then you have to measure outside in as well, of like what matters to the people that you are trying to engage, like in your business or the other businesses you are trying to engage. So always like a huge advocate, whether it's some sort of NPS metric, customer sentiment. Again, I think this is probably a bit further down the line, but as someone who's representing a brand and marketing organization, looking at unaided awareness and how your brand is doing over time, that's something we have to look for like in the long run, but can also be an aspirational metric of when folks are able to recognize your brand and say that they're willing to consider you. That's a pretty significant accomplishment in that growth or like that growth story.
Let me add one more thing to that. I think you have to remember. So we have this next generation coming up, right? My son is 11 years old. The next generation is going to be anyone from someone who's 11 right now to folks that are in the workforce right now. I forget the name of this generation. It's not the millennials. It's the next one.
Can't remember either. Z.
Yeah. Yeah, this generation and the millennial generation are very mission driven. So I think in addition to sort of, is your customer happy with what you just did? I think another thing for folks to consider measuring is your impact on the world, because even if you're at a startup or you're at a large company, you're going to want to inspire this next generation of folks that are coming up. So think very creatively about your metrics. There's a question on there about OKRs that someone answered. Yes. Allison, it stands for objectives and key results, which doesn't say that that's the metric, but what it says is you're trying to figure out what your objective is and what key results you want to derive in order to meet that objective.
Mm-hmm. I think as a startup, obviously we have CRM tools and, financial metrics that we use to measure. It's pretty standard. But I think while you're changing a lot of your processes, I find that until you have a process that works so well, like a dream, that you could just pinpoint what you need to go and get a tool. But as a startup, we're constantly changing, right? So standard tools, I think a lot of tools are on the market, but I actually like to customize my own KPI dashboard using Google Sheets. I know it's not very innovative, but because we're constantly changing, there's no tool out there that is good, is suitable for exactly what I need. So I actually customize my own dashboard because I can change the KPI next month because I want to drill into, say a segment of the customer, why they're converting faster, or some groups that are taking longer to onboard, or how many leads we're generating from a white paper. I can do a lot more detailed, more flexible way to look at a particular metric that I'm trying to track. So I personally, I customize my own dashboard for our own company. So as a startup, so that's a money saving trick.
I think what you just said is really important. It's not just what you measure, it's what you actually do with that information, right? Take some insights from that data, actually use that to make decisions moving forward. I think that's really important.
Totally. And you also just made a point, like customizing what you need. I saw some comments in the chat from Jamila and others around like, don't assume that like big businesses have this figured out. And that's so true. And in fact, like big businesses can probably be even worse because like they started measuring something and they have this whole system around it and can like have a hard time pivoting. So there's like a total happy medium in there. But I love what, Yuyi's point there of like, figure out what you need and then customize, whether it's your reports, your dashboards, your tools, so it gives you the information you need, and embrace that flexibility, even though it means wearing a lot of different hats in those early days.
So I'm going off the script a little bit just because I saw some comments in the chat, but one was around, how do you know when it's time for you to shift to another metric, or how do you know when it's time to incorporate another tool to use? Anybody have any insight on that?
Get it
wrong.
wrong.
The question. Yeah, or like figure out what questions are you asking. Like the second you're staring at a metric and you're like, what is this telling me? Or I have 3 more questions every time I look at this metric. Like those are your signals of like, you need either a different or a supplemental metric to help explain it. So just listen to yourself and kind of what are the questions in your head as you go through those reports.
Jen is much wiser than me. I was going to say, just get it wrong and stumble through it, which is a great way. Yes. But Gen Z, Jamila, thank you.
Okay, cool. Well, so we talked about everything that we should measure. Is there anything that we should not measure? Anything that is like a waste of time for you to measure that?
Measure everything. Whether you look at it or not, measure it. It might be useful at some point.
Okay.
But a deeper answer. Let me think about it while someone else does this.
All right. Anybody else?
I just say don't let it be a distraction, right? You literally can measure just about anything you want these days. So I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think that's the whole go back to measure what matters, or you can find yourself just equally overwhelmed with all of the data, all of the metrics, all of the things, and like just focus on the couple things that are most important to your business and to your objectives.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a startup, I think the key is not to measure against, say, like the bigger companies that are more mature that are generating, hundreds of millions of dollars, because a lot of those metrics are actually not very comparable, and to follow their marketing strategy on, if they do a white paper on such, this is what I need to do as well. Because often you don't know if, how well that works for your business, or if the white paper they're doing is generating enough qualified leads for them. You don't know those things. So it's not always wise to compare to so look at their financial metrics they're doing, they're generating 15% margin. Hey, but as a startup, if your goal is at, SaaS revenue, you should do a lot better than that. So it's not always comparable if you try to measure against a big Fortune 500 company or a business that's been there and has actually struggling themselves trying to innovate to do what you do.
Okay. Anything else on what not to measure, or how to kind of stay away from the distractions of measuring? Okay. Well, I'll go to some of the audience questions and weave those in. We had a question from Mercury Hall to Amy about how do you know when to pivot? For example, when do you realize that what you thought was important to know about your customer and how many of the users got 7 people was not actually that important?
I mean, I think that comes with experience, right? But if you're doing the right things and keeping track of your net promoter scores and keeping track of your, your project or your product North Star, I think like it's all around defining what that right metric is. And if you're finding that, chasing that metric is not getting you the result that you want, you're probably not looking at the right metric. And so really making sure that you're spending the time that what you're measuring is this, what your result is that you're intentional with that. So with a project or product North Star, the first thing is to set your vision. So figure out what your vision is and figure out where you think things are going to go. And then you set the North Star to align with that. And as long as those two things remain in check, you're going to be able to measure the success, right? And so when it becomes a problem is when one of those two things becomes out of balance.
Great, awesome. And then all of you ladies are managers, leaders, and in your organization. So a question arose in regards to employee satisfaction and retention rate. So is there any type of metric that's been established for leaders or owners of the business that they can measure themselves by, so that they're not constantly having to retrain new employees, so they can retain them? And maybe as a leader, I'm the problem. So how do I measure if I'm the problem in this?
So I can start here. We just rolled out a new employee engagement tool across my company. And again, we're a little bit bigger, but not huge. We have about 200 people at the company. And it's been so beneficial because instead of measuring negative trends like attrition and leavers and other stuff, now we're measuring engagement, right? We're measuring how engaged our employees are in what we're doing, how they believe in the mission, and how they want the company to be successful. And it's been so eye-opening because the feedback that we get through doing these sorts of, the tool allows it. It's called Lattice. If you want to take a look, we really like it. But it allows you to do kind of broad surveys across the entire company. And then you can compare that to how other companies who ask the same questions and what their responses are. And so it's really interesting to compare, a small company like Bottle Rocket with bigger companies and what their employee engagement rates look like. You can break it down, there were, 50 different questions. And so you can break down across all of the different questions or by team. I can see exactly how the technology team is as compared to other groups within the company. And so it's really valuable because we can find out where our important areas of focus need to be in order to improve employee engagement.
I have something to add to this question because this week we're actually onboarding new team members. So I feel your pain as, a small company. You're trying to grow your business and you're constantly trying to, train new employees or having new team, you're trying to onboard. So there are a couple of things I urge you to reflect on in terms of the hiring process. If someone's not happy in your company, you need to know why they're not happy. Is this a good fit in the first place? So I often go back to how we were writing the job description, what kind of person's attributes you're looking for. For example, if you're a startup and one person needs to wear many hats, and then you're hiring somebody who always had a career path in Fortune 500 companies that are used to the packages, the benefits, the team, the big team efforts that are just used to doing one fixed process, then if they join your company, they're not going to be happy there for the long term. So I think it's important to always, when you're hiring, look for exactly what you need and to kind of produce a sheet of scoring to say, hey, how many ticks does this person have? Is this person likely to be happy in our company? Is this what they're passionate about? The skill set fits. Because if you're constantly needing someone to upskill, then they might feel stressed and they might think, hey, this is not what I like to do for the long term. So I think to fix the hiring process, to constantly review why the hire fails is a fundamental problem that we need to solve in the first place. Because in our company, we have a policy that we don't ever hire somebody who's always had a track record in big companies, because it's just not going to, it's going to be a culture shock. It's going to be a bad fit. They're not going to like it in the long term because we're a small team. We need to be multifunctional and perform. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, I think there are a lot of tools we can invest into making that onboarding process a lot easier. For example, the most basic of getting email set up, HR. We invest in tools where we can just do it at a click of a button that saves us hours of work, and have the previous person document the process of the most basic, say, login details, the documentation they need, so it can save us, as the people that are running the company, a lot of time in investing in training new employees.
Like that. Thank you. To switch it up a little bit, question came in: if you have a two-sided marketplace, would you feel that we need two specific metrics for each side of the market? This is from Allison Hall.
There was a small startup that I was advising at one point that was, I think, a two-sided marketplace. As you know, the difficulty is getting people from this side and from this side to join the marketplace. And I think in the beginning, the one metric that you really want to measure is how many people do you have from this side of the marketplace versus that side of the marketplace, right? Because you need the people that are going to consume the services that are being offered, but you need the services or the service providers on this side as well. For a two-sided marketplace, I think the metric in the beginning is very simple. It's how many people do you have on each side of the equation. And then from there, it kind of, you have to break that down, right? So that's the top level, but you can't just look at that and stop, right? From there, then what are the strategies you're doing to get those people? And then what is the metric around those strategies? Are those successful or not on both sides?
I actually think there are three sides of the KPIs for that instance. There's the side that, the two, obviously adding to what Florence have said for the two sides, and plus the one set of KPIs for the product or the platform that you're building to see the features you're putting in is going to be adding value to converting both sides of the customer that you're trying to acquire. So it's actually the middle and the two ends.
Any other comments on it? Okay, there was also mention of vanity metrics, which I found that to be very interesting. How do you all feel about these vanity metrics?
Measure what matters.
Yeah, I have to imagine that came up during the distractions question, right? Like there's just feel like, again, like if you're a social media influencer, like some of those vanity stats like matter, but if you can call it a vanity stat, you probably don't need it.
Totally agree. Well, what about measuring price elasticity? Anybody have any comments or feedback on that?
Yeah, test. So you don't know, pricing is the hardest thing in the world. I bet Jen knows a lot about that, but Capital One is very data-driven, famously. But price elasticity, you want, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, to be able to garner the highest value for what you're offering to the world. And it's hard to know what that is. So you have to test the market and the elasticity of the market by doing that. Also, remember, there's all of us think we're all different in many ways, right? So the way I might think of it might be different from the way Amy thinks about it. So we can get into which we would never do, a shouting match about who's right, Amy? But we can instead do a study on it, because at some point, you have to go to the data. And maybe they can tell us if this addresses their question about price elasticity.
Well, I have to say, to your point, Florence, like there are also just great tools out there now to figure out how to do a bunch of different testing, right? Like you can get really scrappy sometimes in early days. The more that folks are, in e-commerce or embracing digital tools, like those can be great ways to get like quick and dirty reads on like price elasticity particularly for products. I think services can be a bit more like challenging sometimes.
And I'm going to follow up because Jamie Garza posed the question about price elasticity. And so he followed up the question with, how do you balance losing good customers with a price increase?
So you have to understand the full picture, right? Profitability of the customer as well. If a customer is not profitable for you, the profitability is something you could define in different ways. It could be a number profitability. It could be, what do they add to my ecosystem? What do they add to my to my company or my mission or what have you? And if that equation works, then that's another factor that you place into your price elasticity and pricing decisions. It's not always straight math.
There is a good topic I think you can study on called value-based pricing. We actually spend a lot of time studying that topic just in the last 12 months, and there's some really good posts on how do you define your pricing. And I think the key takeaway that I had from that study was the problem you're trying to solve, or the product you're trying to sell that solves the problem. How much pain and how much economic impact does it have on your customer? That's a huge goal. As I previously said, a customer is willing to pay a lot more for not having a shutdown of a plant for $500,000 per every hour, versus a customer who's just spending that money to monitor their temperature in a building that comes out of their budget. There's a lot. You have to understand what is the economic impact on your customer by buying your product and services. And there are a lot of topics depending on if you're a B2C company or a B2B company, because there are a lot of intricate ways how you can test if your pricing is, you've maximized your pricing based on the problem you're trying to solve, and how you price and how you set different set of tiers in your pricing by the packages that your customer can buy, or how they consume. So I do recommend, if you have the time, to look into VBP, the value-based pricing. There are a lot of good content out there that I think you'll benefit from.
And I think even just staring at what is meant by that word good, what is a good customer, right, is probably different for a bunch of the different businesses and folks who are out there, right? Whether you think about the actual lifetime value of a customer, repeat purchases, whether you're thinking about brand advocacy, referrals, right? Customers can drive value in different ways to your business as well, which might also land you with different answers to that question of what you're willing to do, whether it's a price sensitivity, and whether that's lost revenue and or just lost advocacy. So I think that would be something I would consider as well.
I'm going to pose the last question to you guys out of the chat. What advice do you have for an entrepreneur that is going to compete with a larger company, but needs to set themselves apart while being flexible and not wasting funds? So this is particularly pertaining to a mobile 3D animated emoji application, most closely relating to the Animoji on steroids.
I can take a stab at that. We at Synergic, we have this, some of our clients most of them are larger, but some of them are more early stage. We have a wonderful client out of the Bay Area called Growth Simple. And now trying to hide some facts, but and I think they were in a situation where they were competing with a larger company for some of the services that they have. And we've seen this a number of times before. And my general advice to younger companies when they do this is be upfront and honest about who you are, because the value that you bring to the table for the potential client is your innovation and your value. So I'm sure you all have read Brené Brown or studied Brené Brown work on vulnerability. Be out there and be vulnerable about who and what you are and what you offer, because that is your value, and just go out there and say, this is who I am and this is what I offer.
Yeah, Florence, even further on that and building on Brene Brown, like I think that personal connection is really important for a small company as well. Sometimes there's a feeling that the bigger companies, don't care, or they're too big to care or whatever. And so a small company has a real opportunity to build that kind of personal connection with their customers in a way that a big company really can't do.
Yeah. And I would say, like, be thoughtful, but don't find yourself in the trap of competing wholeheartedly necessarily with like the big company. Like typically the advantage of the entrepreneur is like you have something or some set of things that are uniquely differentiated, right, from that big company. Like get really, really clear on what those things are and lean into those, right? In that spirit of like, what makes you differentiated? What value do you bring that could be, again, experience oriented or something else? But don't feel like you have to compete on all of the dimensions. There's typically something unique in what brought you to market to begin with. Absolutely.
And to add to that, if you're filling out an RFP, don't think you have to answer every question in the way a big company would answer the RFP. you just can't. It's.
Anything else on that? Okay, my last question to this amazing panel. Are there any other insightful pieces of information that you can provide to the audience on metrics that you don't feel like they've heard yet at this point?
I'll go first on that. Before metrics, people. Yui said this in some ways. If you find the right people to work with and you enjoy working with, everything else will follow. People before metrics.
Mm-hmm.
I think also sharing transparently is really important. And so even both within your company as well as externally. So in BottleRocket, we have a monthly all hands company meeting where we share the status and progress of how the company is doing with everyone. And it's really, really helpful for, everybody working on the work to see what the impact is on the business of the company. And then we even, so we started a diversity and inclusion initiative a few months ago. And so we published all of our diversity data on our website. It is not where we would like it to be, but you know what? It's there on our website so everybody can see it, because nothing's going to change if we aren't transparent and honest with ourselves.
I think from my perspective, I think once you have the metrics, use it, because it's very, very powerful. You can quote it to investors, quote it to your customers. You can quote it in your company blogs that shows that you have the great understanding of the problem you're trying to solve, the pain point of your customers, and investor will respect you for having a really good understanding of your business. So once you have it, use it.
And I'd say just remember, metrics are only one piece of the puzzle, right? And like your job as the owner or the entrepreneur is typically to scan back out and make sure you have the entire puzzle picture, and then fill in the pieces like as you get them. But metrics themselves are only one piece of that puzzle.
All right. Well, thank you so much, ladies. I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed getting to know you all through this, and really appreciate all the engagement from the audience members. You all are wonderful, and you all are just on it. So I will hand it over to Tracy, who will take us to the next stage.
Thank you so much. Great actionable information. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with other women entrepreneurs that were just looking for that little tidbit to help them get to the next level. So thank you guys so much. Ladies, we are at the end of the second annual Women of Innovation, and that makes my heart happy and sad. Thank you all for joining us. I want to just give you a couple of housekeeping. Number one, all of the videos from yesterday and today, actually for the whole week, are on our YouTube station at DEC Network, and make sure you subscribe. That's what the young kids tell me to say. Secondly, if you do not know the DEC Network, please find out about us. We do mentoring, we do funding, we do all kinds of education programs all throughout the year. So go to our website, thedec.co. Notice I have this young people next to me telling me. At 2 p.m., we're going to have a vision board session. If you've never done one, it's a great exercise, both physically and mentally. So please join us for that. Tonight, we've got State of Entrepreneurship. It's not the governor of Dallas, but it's the mayor of Dallas. I said the governor the other day. I promoted him. But listen, the reason why this is such an important thing to listen to is because we talk about funding, who's doing what industries are doing well. It's really a great way to kind of see the state of entrepreneurship in Dallas. Thank you, Thomson Reuters. We couldn't do it without you. We couldn't do it without Capital One, our sponsors. Again, the people of those brands really represent them well, because they really are about driving women entrepreneurs. They walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Dallas needs you, women, all of you that are listening, whether you have an idea and you haven't done it yet, if you have a great prototype and you haven't taken it up, if you've got a business that needs more marketing, more whatever, Dallas needs women entrepreneurs. We want to be the #1 place for people to live and work, because women just do it differently. I think we kind of do it a little better, but we want to do it right. So please, please take your idea and take it to the next level and ask for help. We've got lots of help to offer you at the DEC Network. It's been a great 2 days. I don't know how many days it's been now. We still have more to go. So if you're done with the summit, please jump into some other sessions today, tonight, and tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next year at the 3rd annual, I'm going to put that out there, Dallas Startup Week.
What do you mean women?
No, Women of Innovation. 3rd Women of Innovation. It's been a long day, people. Thank you so much, and have a great, great day.